CCPD. Call this meeting to order. This evening on the consent agenda, we have several items. We have the town accountant's warrants. We have a lot of minutes that we have been reviewed and ready for approval this evening. We have December 5th town meeting preview meeting, December 5th, December 14th, December 18th, and December 21st meetings. We have minutes for January 4th, January 11th, January 19th, January 27th. Do you ever wonder what the selectmen do or select board do? We go to a lot of meetings, we haven't been here. February 1, February 9, February 10, and the hearing on February 10th. We also have one-day special license, so it's a wine and malt beverages license for the Rotary Club of Concord for a Pops concert at 51 Walnut Street on April 8th from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. and an extension of hours for the Trails End Cafe at 97 Lowell Road. The request is until midnight Saturday, April 2nd, with the last call at 11:30. Saltbox Kitchen at 84 Commonwealth Avenue is requesting an extension of hours on April 8th, 22nd, and 29th until 11 p.m. with last call at 10:30 p.m.
Move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next on the agenda is the town manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Finance Committee's report has been sent to the printer as of this evening, as was the annual town report, and both documents will be back from the printer before town meeting, which convenes on April 4th. The moderator and town council will join us in reviewing the town meeting motions tomorrow afternoon, and a traditional meeting to make sure we're all set for the town meeting. The Acton Water District meeting is scheduled for tonight, their annual meeting. There was an article on there requesting that a connection be made to 37 Knox Trail. But the commissioner voted at their last meeting to make no motion on that, so we're waiving. We're not planning to attend that meeting tonight, and we'll look for an on-site solution to the water needs for 37 Knox for the transportation building. And the design work on the school bus transportation facility is continuing. The current schedule calls for an advertisement in the Central Register on March 23rd and bids to be due on May 1st. So we were hoping to have bids in hand at the time of town meeting, but we'll miss that by about a month. But hopefully construction will be on target for completion in February of 2017. The Natural Resources Commission continued its hearing on the Sleepy Hollow culvert replacement. It'll be continued this Wednesday at 7 p.m. and a site visit is scheduled for noon on Wednesday this week. Jeff Shelley, Police Officer Jeff Shelley, is the new Community Safety Officer. He's been working for the town for 20 years, including on the Nemlik tactical unit, so he has a lot of experience in Concord. And then lastly, the Concord Independent Batteries 10-year agreement with the selectmen for using the town cannons expires at the end of this month, and so they'll be at your next meeting on the 28th to request renewal of that agreement. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the town manager?
I have a suggestion. I think it could be, since it's 10 years since that Concord battery contract was first entered into, it could be helpful if there's some background material for the board to just get everybody up to speed as they think about these issues.
Are there any changes proposed?
I've looked. They have not proposed any changes, and I've looked it over, and it's. I don't have any changes to suggest, but having the history, and there is some history that goes with it. It would be useful to be sure the board had that before your next meeting.
Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? So the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the extensions to deed restrictions at 393 and 42A Estabrook Road. Julia, would you like to come and take your place at a microphone for us? Want to walk us through these?
Sure, good evening. Julia Kay, Natural Resources Director for the town. And the Emersons granted a lot of land to the town and to land trusts as well in the 70s and 80s, and most of those were permanent conservation restrictions. So I apologize. They're probably the most complicated restrictions that we have, and I apologize. I got the address wrong and also referenced the wrong restriction. I have additional copies of the two, the Lot 1A and Parcel X. What I lot 2A and parcel X. What I had provided you with is lot 1A, which is the parcel behind the two deed restrictions, and that is a perpetual restriction. So these are the two restrictions that are deed restrictions. They're not perpetual restrictions. And they were contemplated at the time that there was a perpetual restriction placed on additional land at 393 Estabrook Road. These are placed on the former Emerson homestead and the adjacent parcel, and that is at 393 Estabrook Road. And I provided you with an aerial that hopefully will provide a little bit of perspective or context as to where these restrictions are. And if you see the green restriction here, that is lot 1A, and that's perpetual. And then below that are the two deed restrictions on lots 1B, 2A, and parcel X. And at the time that these restrictions were placed in 1986, the purpose was to limit development on parcel 2A to 2 residential structures with accessory structures that could be also constructed. There would be the possibility that there could be 3 structures, residential structures constructed there.
On 2A.
On 2A. Over parcel X, this was identified as an additional farm building area and was to be restricted for general agricultural purposes, tree farming, livestock, horse breeding, but no residential dwelling would be permitted there. And then the second, that's one deed restriction. And then the second restriction is over lot B, which is the easternmost parcel. That was also identified as an additional farm building area, and to be used just for general agricultural purposes, including the maintenance and replacement of farm buildings. But there could be one residential structure on that without the restriction. So both the CRSC and the Natural Resources Commission have recommended that these deed restrictions be extended so that the intent of the restriction when it was originally conceived is maintained. I have spoken with the Rasmussens. They're out of town this evening, so weren't able to attend, but they're comfortable with these restrictions. They had actually assumed that they were perpetual. Deed restrictions, just by the nature of how they're constructed, they're valid initially for 30 years, and then can be extended by the benefited party, which in this case is the select board, for perpetual, in perpetuity, but it has to happen every 20 years. So these restrictions will expire in 2016. On behalf of the Sierra Stewardship Committee and the Natural Resources Commission, I'm requesting your consideration of extending those restrictions.
I think the Rasmussens have done an amazing service to our town by keeping these in this restrictions, and I am grateful for them for that. This is a very large parcel. It's combined a very large number of parcels and a lot of acreage. Anyone have questions for Delia?
I was just curious, if you can clarify the process, if there's deed restrictions or a conservation restriction, is the landowner is kind of negotiating with the town in terms of balancing levels of development or restrictions to development, and in turn, is there a tax value reduced or increased, or?
We haven't really got to that level of discussion, but as far as the conservation restrictions, these are older restrictions and they're a little bit broad. And they don't allow buildings, but there is, outdoor recreation is permitted, but no structures associated with those. As far as the deed restrictions, if there were conversations about that, it wouldn't be, the deed restrictions wouldn't be the vehicle where that would necessarily be discussed. It would just be limited to what.
Right, so it changes what can be done on the site, so it changes the value.
It does change it. Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just curious about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if I might ask, the other way that this can be achieved these kinds of conservation restrictions in perpetuity is by granting the restriction to be held by a third party as opposed to putting it in the deed. Have I got that right?
So in situations like this where there is substantial residential development already on the parcel, it may not always make sense. I mean, sometimes
It's
like with the
complex.
recent, right,
Yeah.
like with the Gower restriction that the Land Trust recently acquired, the entire parcel went into restriction, but they carved out the building envelope. So that building envelope is really, you know, the homeowner can do with what they like, and it's just the restricted area that's outside of that. So, yes, it's complicated, and every situation is going to be different.
So is there any way to restructure this so that it doesn't come up every 20 years and require action?
I think that it would be difficult to place this into a perpetual restriction. I recognize the, you know, the possibility of that meaning it falls off the radar. We do have very good databases now, but as far as having the state sign off on this as a perpetual restriction, I think we would have to do a lot of negotiating on either existing restrictions, maybe strengthening them, or looking at other.
In order for the state to accept them as permanent restrictions? Okay. And in your view, given the fact that there's already a lot of buildings on these parcels, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that?
I wouldn't say, I think it's wise to continue the existing restrictions. I don't think that I would recommend pursuing something because it is, you know, it is right up against the road, and that is where the development, or most of the development is.
So Julia, in 20 years then, could the owner decide that they don't want to go ahead and continue this restriction?
So the way that these restrictions are structured, the landowner does not have to give their approval to extend them.
Continuation.
It is solely up to the select board as the benefit party.
Okay.
On the other hand, if we miss it for some reason and it lapses, then it's lapsed.
Correct.
Slapped. And we lose jurisdiction and it reverts
To
to
land owned outright without
unrestricted.
Okay.
Do we have other parcels that this also applies to, for which we every 20 years would need to review and extend the conditions of the parcels?
There are a handful. The church, Our Lady Help in West Concord has a deed restriction on that because it's so, you know, it's quite developed and the state wouldn't have accepted it as a perpetual. There are a couple of older restrictions, and for whatever reasons they were placed under a 99-year. I'm not sure if that was because at that point in time it was considered that would mean that it was perpetual, but it doesn't.
Our time has changed,
Yeah,
that's true.
right.
So, tell us, reassure us on what kind of processes are in place that we don't drop a stitch on these restrictions that need to be renewed.
Yeah, so we do have databases where we keep all this information. We've got deed restrictions categorized separately from conservation restrictions. We have ones that require action items that are categorized differently. And we have the file, which, you know, we do have pretty well organized files at this point. But there's
So
always
do
that
you get like an alert on your iPhone or something?
you know what I do for ones, I mean, that we have, I do have ones that are going to, you know, that are natural resources permits, that will expire in a number of years. I do have that on my Outlook calendar. Not sure that I'll be here in 20 years.
I would say, are you an employee of perpetuity?
Maybe we need to look in advance and schedule for certain town select board meetings. in-
Right. I to do an agenda. For,
Exactly, agenda
20 years
items in
out.
advance.
Right.
That's a very
I think I'll probably
long.
miss it.
So I wonder whether it would be useful to have a, you know, a 100-year calendar that just said, you know, for each year, which ones are coming up this year.
Mhm.
That was just there in case your successor
Mhm.
doesn't use Outlook or something.
Right.
Um,
We do have that in a database. I mean,
Yeah.
they're categorized quite differently. I mean, they're flagged
right,
as ones that will require
Yeah.
action.
okay, all right. Well, the law is fun.
Is there any further discussion on these restrictions and extensions of them?
Yeah, I think you're ready for a
I am
motion,
ready for a
right?
motion.
Move to extend the deed restriction over Lot 2A and Parcel X at 393 Estabrook Road for a period of 20 years pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 184, Section 27, and the terms of the original restriction recorded at Book 16861, page 308,
319,
319, I'm sorry,
changed.
in the Middlesex Registry of Deeds.
Second, with gratitude to the original grantors, the Emersons.
And to the rationals.
All in favor of that?
Aye.
There's a second. Motion, right?
Move to extend the deed restriction over Lot 1B at 42A Estabrook Road for a period of 20 years pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 184, Section 27, and the terms of the original restriction recorded at Book 16861, page 315 in the Middlesex Registry of Deeds.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you, Leah.
The next item on our agenda is a continuation of our discussion of Estabrook Woods. This discussion is centered around the draft committee charge that has been provided. Would you like to start this conversation since you and Chris were being drafting the
Sure.
charge?
And I'll just note for anyone who hasn't seen this and would like to, it's, if you don't have a Mac product, you can get on the internet and it's under support, agenda support materials, on the website, for the, under Board of Selectmen. So, this is a draft charge. We had some discussion at our last meeting about creating a committee to give us some advice on what to do about parking and access to the Estabrook Woods. Because as of late, and I mean in the last couple of years, coming to a head really in this past year, there have been many issues that have arisen as the result of more people coming in cars with dogs, perhaps. As everyone remembers, the police chief met with residents, had received a lot of calls, and implemented a temporary a provisional parking solution on Estabrook Road. We've heard from the police chief a couple of times, and his recommendation at our last meeting was that we continue that parking situation for another 90 days anyway, and we certainly can extend it further if we wish, in order to give us some time to review the situation and think about what whether a longer-term solution should be any different. And among other things, we knew we would need to wait for better weather to assess surface conditions for parking, and indeed to get out there and measure things so we understand exactly where the public right-of-way is and where the public road and private road is, and do a little research and so forth. So we discussed putting together a committee that would give us some advice on these issues. On the board, in our discussion, we discussed both having a very narrow charge that would really look only at parking at the access points, or perhaps a broader charge that looked not only at that, but also at some of the other types of issues that have arisen in the last couple of years. This charge that Chris and I worked on endeavors to create a committee that has representation by members of the public at large, by abutters and neighbors of the access points, by the Trails Committee and the Natural Resources Commission, and it has the support that it will need from the town and the ex officio members of the police chief or his designee, the CPW director or his designee, and the planning director or her designee. And we have a member of the Natural Resources Commission. We've already had lots of comments from folks on this charge, and one thing I think is clear is that this should be broadened a little bit, the committee composition, and it should include somebody from the land trust, I think, because they own the entrance at Lowell Road and other pieces of property, and indeed have a keen interest in the preservation and enjoyment of open spaces in Concord, and they can bring us a lot by being on this, and they're willing to do it. It also occurred to me that, we have a Conservation Restriction Stewardship Committee, and it might be very useful to have somebody from that committee on this committee as well. And if not, if others, that would be my suggestion. And then we would add 2 more people, and we would still have the necessary uneven number for the purpose of voting.
So it would be to 9.
And 11, 12.
Yes. Well, we have right now 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. So it would go from 7 to 9 with the ex officio members. And in some ways that could be a good thing, because I think this committee might actually have a lot of legwork to do in terms of fact-finding. And this would enable them to split tasks up, and we're going to be asking them for a pretty speedy turnaround in terms of assessing the situation, getting back to us with a draft report, holding public hearings and the like. But they're going to need lots of time to meet individually with other stakeholders and perhaps review documents, perhaps spend time with these ex officio staff members to make sure they have all the questions they should be asking to begin with, and then to be working on the answers. There were some folks who suggested that we really should include Carlisle as a member of the committee, somebody from Carlisle or representing the interests of Carlisle, since entrances of the woods are in fact in Carlisle. That's complicated for us. I'm not sure how the board feels about that, because this is a committee that is supposed to make recommendations to us. We have policies and procedures that call for us to, in general, appoint people only who live in Concord. This might qualify for an exception if we wanted to do it. Certainly, a specific duty and responsibility enumerated if we didn't put a Carlisle person on the committee as part of its composition would be to do fact-finding in Carlisle. And talk to the, yes, to talk to the relevant folks in Carlisle to collect facts and information, because obviously if you've only got so many entrances, anything you do in one place is likely to impact the others, so we need to understand the whole picture. So on the question of whether this is a narrow charge or a broad charge, it's specifically a narrow charge in that they must look at parking and access and other issues at the access points, like signage, for example. But they also have the option to consider whether there are other measures that might be taken to improve on issues identified that would require additional planning or additional time to implement. And I had in mind our town governance study committee, which had a very specific set of tasks that were within its purview. But when they got started, they found that people wanted to talk to them about a lot of other things, like town meeting, for example, which was not part of their charge, and like schools, for example, which was not part of their charge. Nonetheless, they listened, they found some facts, they considered some of those issues, and they made some recommendations for further thinking or further action on some of those issues. And I would see this committee as being able to do something similar. And I know each of you had an opportunity to see the charge previously. I think there were a few edits that were made. Chris, I think you had the opportunity to edit as well.
Well, I think it's really well drafted, so thanks. Those are tricky things to do for both of you. The Carlisle question, could we finesse it by giving ourselves the opportunity to invite an ex officio representative from Carlisle and talk to the select board or somebody, I don't know who over there, but if they want to ask somebody to participate?
I would suggest that contact might happen town manager to town manager in Carlisle. That's Mr. Goddard, right? And
They could just come if they wanted to.
And well, we define. Chris could gauge their interest and get their thoughts about what we're up to with this committee, and allow them to let us know how they would like to participate, or whether they would like to participate.
Or even the option of, in letting them know this, they must be feeling the same kind of pressures at the access points as we are.
I don't know if they are. They're further away.
And we've asked the police chief, we've asked the chief for his opinion about that, and he did check in, and they had none
It's a different access.
We could
with the parking lot.
we could inform Carlisle of what we're planning on doing with our committee. Perhaps they kind of mirror our setup and have their own as well.
Another possibility, in which case then the two committees could work together.
But I like your suggestion, just ask Chris to
Sure.
contact.
Just check in.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think the land trust, you gotta put somebody, they've gotta have a seat at the table for this, they're too involved.
Yep, that was kind of a dunderheaded omission on my part, so.
So, can I mind if I just repeat who I think we just agreed would be members of this committee?
Yes, please.
So we have one representative from the NRC, 2 members owning property abutting or neighboring Estherbrook Woods, Chamberlain Woods, or Punkatasset, 1 member of the Trails Committee, a land trust member, a representative from the Conservation Restrictions Stewardship Committee, 3 citizens at large representing a diversity of interests, backgrounds, and expertise, and 3 ex officio staff members, a police chief or designee, CPW director or designee, and the planning director or designee. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus 3 ex officio. Okay?
The other issue that I wanted to comment on is that the broad versus narrow charge. This came up when we had a public discussion of this. I get the need to kind of get your arms around everything. But as I said at the time, solving a signing problem and not getting the access straight isn't going to be a very effective solution. And so while I think it's fine, I hope that the understanding is that's the problem that has to get solved. And when that gets solved, then we can worry about what the best kind of signing is and other educational measures that we should take to make sure we've communicated as effectively as we can to get the word out. But I don't want to lose sight of that's the problem that has to get solved. We'll just be back here again.
Do you feel like this charge does
I
that?
think it's fine, but I just don't, you were correctly pointing out that there's latitude. And I think that's fine, but it's just, I hope that isn't an invitation to start, picking up all kinds of additional issues. And
Well, one of the points that was made in some of the comments that we received is that there are a lot of private landowners in here in the Estabrook Woods, and so we're limited as a town in terms of to what extent we can undertake to solve problems on other people's property. So, there might be suggestions that could be communicated to the owners of that property, or perhaps the committee will come up with suggestions that you form another working group on some of these issues going further. But certainly we have authority and responsibility for our roads and parking within the town of Concord, and we must address that. And whether we should or can address the rest of these issues is perhaps a little more.
Well, I'll be very specific. Signage. There's no doubt that we got to have good signage. But the way I would see this playing out is the committee comes up with a set of proposals for access.
Mm-hmm.
That then there's a hearing, as suggested in here, and it comes here finally to the board, and we do whatever it is we do. And then it would seem to me we'd have to get our hands around some professional sign people, that could be the town, to say, here's what we want to accomplish, what's the appropriate signage to make that happen, rather than have this committee wrestle with, I mean, you gotta have good signage and you better do it right. That's,
Right, so for example, a recommendation that the committee could come up with is that the signage on the road should be more harmonious with the natural environment in which it is placed, and then leave it to the select board to figure out
so
with the town manager
you don't need
how
to
to
go
implement
down that road, so to speak, go down that road in real detail, as opposed to the access issue where it's gonna, that recommendations are gonna have to be like real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The only other thing I would say is that we heard quite a bit about dogs, and I do love dogs, and have certainly had my own share of dogs and grand dogs, but we do have authority as a town over what people do with dogs on town roads. We don't in the woods, except on our own property. But at the entrances where it seems that a lot of the dog issues have taken place, we do have authority there, although it would require town meeting action in the form of a bylaw. But I would hope that this committee would think about those issues and talk about those a little bit in its other recommendations, because it's been something we heard a lot about.
Well, one of the other things, and I suspect that this is what you were also alluding to in the option to consider other measures, is that we are focusing on Estabrook Woods here. But some of what we learn in this process may also guide us in other parts of Concord, because we're very blessed with a lot of different, a lot of different parcels of trails and land. And, I would hope that we'd be able to learn some pieces of signage, for example. If there's a harmonious sign that is developed for the Estabrook Woods, we may find that very popular in other places.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's also, it's very nice when you do a lot of work and you can use it somewhere else.
efficiency.
I would suggest, Madam Chair, that we take public comment before we consider any sort of vote on this charge. And Steve, I don't know if we've run right over you. Did you have thoughts?
Oh, no, I think I agree with Mike. I like the addition of the land trust and conservation stewardship representation on the committee. And I think I totally support that.
Good.
All right, so the only comment I have is that this committee will have a very difficult job ahead to maintain the focus on access, which I think is primary. But as you talked about a solution to dogs, that broadens that charge beyond access. which I think it was a conversation we heard from a lot of people, that dogs and people are of a concern, and then that broadens the opportunity for even greater emotional issues to be brought. So I worry that we have to confine the conversation. I mean, to access is key, but once we start taking on all of the other considerations, this can get very deeply mired. I'm worried. I think we need to maintain the focus here. It was really about figuring out the access issues.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, though, that it's inevitable that in the minds of people who want to talk about these issues, they're all twined up.
Yeah.
So it's pretty hard to talk about one of them without talking about the others. So I think no matter what we tell this committee its job is, they're going to hear about these other things.
I think that's probably true, but their charge is really.
And
Yeah, that's right, and no committee should sit still for a charge so tightly wrapped that
Yeah, I
they
don't
can't
think
wander
so.
around a little bit.
No, it will be up to the committee. You know, the committee might decide, we don't know how to solve it. There's a dog problem. We don't know how to solve it. The town should revisit the dog bylaw. That might be their solution.
That,
Yep.
that could be informative
Right.
to the
Okay.
town, though, that
Yeah, I agree with that.
even just at the access point where the town jurisdiction does lie is can be part of it, is part of their charge,
If there
so,
was a solution to that point,
exactly.
that would be.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we ask for comment? So there is a very full room again, so welcome back to our discussion. I hope you all had an opportunity to take a look at the charge before coming today, and I'm wondering if anybody would like to come forward and offer your opinions on the draft charge as written with the amendments that we just discussed during the meeting. Let's start in the front and come on forward, introduce yourself, come to the microphone, pick a microphone.
My name is Paul Jameson. I live at 419 College Road. I think you've all come up with a terrible solution. I think your solution of restricting parking and access to Estabrook roads is horrendous. I think what you've done is institute collective punishment of the whole town of Concord by deciding that because there were a few people who irritated the neighbors, that you're going to punish the whole town by reducing the amount of parking space. This is an unfair solution done extremely off the top of your heads in response to...
Well, first of all, we didn't do it, the police chief did it.
Okay.
And second of all, it's temporary, while we put this committee in place so the committee could go find an appropriate permanent solution for us. So I don't think you're correct that we've done anything, and certainly nothing off the top of our heads.
You have the amount of parking space.
So
That was unfair to people in town, in
I-
my opinion.
I really appreciate that point of view, Mr. Jameson, and I really hope that when this committee is formed and it has it's identified on the website, so there are some email addresses and they hold some public hearings, that you will go and share your views and make sure your voice is heard with this committee. I hope you'll do that.
Okay. But I want to reiterate again, I think the solution you've come up with is absolutely terrible.
So I want to remind everyone here, that this discussion is really about the charge of this committee, not on the many, many issues that we've heard in the previous two meetings. We know that there are a lot of issues concerning dogs and people and parking. This discussion right now is really focused on the charge of the committee to review the access opportunities for Estabrook Woods.
May I suggest then that you add to this, your consideration, the effect on other people in the town, not just the neighbors, not a limited group, that you have a group of administrators, I think, without much representation from people in the town who want to have access.
So
In my opinion.
just to reassure you on that, let me note that we will have 3 members of the public at large representing a diversity of interests, backgrounds, and experience. And they are directed to consider Well, they're directed to develop criteria to evaluate ways to handle access that include taking into account the interests of the public.
I think 3 is a fairly small number in terms of the number of people in the town who are affected. You have a lot of people on the committee, the police chief, maybe administrators, but not many townspeople.
So everyone would be invited to attend the open meetings so that opinions can be heard from across town, even if we don't have 30 people representing the public at large. The public's input is certainly part of this conversation so that we develop opportunities for access to the woods. And I think that's part of what this charge is. So I hope you will come to the meetings and you will voice an opinion. And if you're interested on the committee, there are 3 positions at large. I don't know. We haven't made any decisions on anybody, so.
There also aren't any administrators on the committee at all except for ex officio members. All of the other members are
I misspoke on that.
members of the
Public. Right.
Yeah, that is true. So for example, if we have a member from the Natural Resources Commission,
that would be
a member from the
citizen.
Trails Committee, someone from the Land Trust, someone from the Conservation Restriction Stewardship Committee, all those people are citizens here in Concord, and it's unlikely that too many of them are going to turn out to be abutters or neighbors of the access points, because there aren't that many people who are abutters or neighbors.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, I see a strong hand up in the back. Mr. Butler.
My name is Louis Thursday. I live in 410 Lexington Road. I urge this committee to understand that this is not an access problem. This is a problem of our people's and dogs' behavior, and that the purpose of this committee should reflect that fact very clearly. I urge you to consider that framing the issue as an access problem, it's the wrong answer, and that even taking to an end an access solution will not provide what we all collectively in the town of Concord want, and especially the neighbors that abut the public road and the easement that goes to Estabrook Woods want, because it will not prevent the behaviors that have caused the issues that are being discussed. So this is not a parking problem, this is not an access problem, this is a problem of how to prevent certain people doing certain behaviors that are entirely unacceptable. Therefore, I am particularly concerned with the focus and the purpose of the commission as it has been described, because I don't believe that it will address the problem. I think that we should take the issues as they are, which is people with dogs, and I'm one of them, and I take my dog to Estabrook just about every single day. And I am the first one to recognize that there are substantial issues, and I disagree with a lot of things that are going on there. But I don't think that making these an access problem will solve any problem at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, please come forward. Introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Nick Darwell. I'm actually a Carlisle resident. I think it was about 15 years ago, I helped to organize and chair something called the Estabrook Council, which was actually a group of really all the conservation organizations that had direct interest in the Estabrook Woods. It included TTOR, CCF, CLCT, I assume all these acronyms need to be spelled out, as well as the landowners, Harvard, Middlesex, and a number of private landowners. Neil Rasmussen, for instance, was a member of it. And I simply wanted to request that you do include someone from Carlisle. We do have problems. They aren't quite as acute as yours, but your problems are sort of moving north as you expect they might. In other words, as access constraints occur in Concord, sure enough, it's flowing into what we call Kibbe Place and Malcolm Preserve and other access points. So it really is sort of all of one. And I would very much like to offer myself as a potential participant in the committee. But I also want to thank all of you for establishing writing the charge and establishing this committee, because I think it's really, really important. I think the police chief has done wonderful work trying to get a handle on this, but it is going to take some additional thought. I appreciate the comments that have been made here this evening, because I think that access is a tool to control certain issues around the woods. I think the internet is enabling this unbelievable gem to experience more traffic than we ever anticipated. And it's tough, and it's not clear what the answer may be, so we've got to think creatively. There was some comments about signage. I think that signage is, again, kind of a tool to enforce good thinking around a set of rules. And I think that whatever those rules may be are going to require some thought. We're going to require the input of many citizens, I hope, from both towns. But I would urge you to include Carlisle and to consider myself as a candidate. I think that the woods are, I mean, as you all well know, the woods are made up mostly of private lands. There's public access land in certain areas. Certainly all the Concord land is such. The CLCT land is such as well. But the Harvard core and the 400 acres of buffer lands that were added during the campaign for the Estabrook Woods in the 90s are really part of this Estabrook complex, but they are also the backyards of individual landowners. And so when we talk about access, we've got to do so with an eye towards the fact that we are basically allowing people access to the backyards of these very generous landowners, which makes it doubly tricky for this committee to sort of think all of this through. And unfortunately, you can't say, here's parking, this gets you access to Punkatassett, and when you hit the end of that, stop and turn back, because it's not going to happen. Really, once you're in the Estabrook complex, you're in it as a whole, and I think it's very, very important for all of us to think of it as a whole, and therefore think about kind of the rules framework that's going to be enforced in part by access restrictions and signage and so forth, very carefully.
Thank you.
Anyway, that's about
Can I
it.
ask you a question? You mentioned having started a conversation with the Estabrook Council. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what, is this group still meeting? What was the purpose of this?
It is not met in a long, long time. Actually, there are members here. Joan Ferguson was a member. As I mentioned, Neil Rasmussen was a member. We had Wes Ward from TTOR, who's no longer with TTOR. Marion Thornton, who I'm sure many of you know well, was one of the driving forces behind it. But the whole goal was simply to provide oversight for the woods, and it wasn't clear exactly what oversight was needed. You'll notice there are some signs in a number of access points, and those are ones we put in place. Andy Bewiener from Harvard was also a member of the council, and we've interacted, and he's come into play at a number of points in time over the years, having to do with kind of intrusion issues and disturbance issues. And so I think the group was somewhat ad hoc in nature over the past number of years, but has sort of re-engaged as issues have arisen. There have been some disturbance there was some painting of stone walls with an eye towards directing cross-country runners. And this has been sort of a perennial issue. And we wrestled it to the ground, talking with the coaches of various cross-country teams to make sure that they go about it differently. They use staked signs which can be removed end of season.
Chalk would be okay.
There you go. They continue to use paint on the rocks, which wears off after a couple of years. But these are the types of things that we would engage on and kind of wrestle to ground.
Are there,
That's helpful.
are there minutes or notes, or I'm thinking that it would be useful to have some kind of background of what the council
Yeah,
is
there are. I
wrestling
mean,
with?
we're going back a ways. It's well over 10 years. I think it's about coming up on 15 years.
Wasn't it an appointed group, or do folks just got together and
No, folks pretty much got together. So
did
there
Harvard
was
participate?
Yeah.
Andy Beamer
Yes.
from Harvard, who now is who directs the Museum of Comparative Zoology.
Yeah, right.
And so it was more ad hoc in nature. It was not appointed by any specific group. But it was, I would receive calls. I think over the years I've probably received several dozen calls from people wanting maps of the Estabrook Woods. Most important, calls from people who wanted to include the Estabrook Woods in trail books.
Yes.
And I would always explain patiently that these were private lands, and while there were trail maps of Great Brook and trail maps of other areas, public recreation areas, this was not a public recreation area per se. It really didn't belong in such books. With the rise and I'll say the momentum of the internet, it's certainly been around for a couple decades here. It's harder and harder to stem that tide.
Yeah.
We recently were successful. LL Bean, individuals under the LL Bean banner were leading guided trips in the woods. And we managed to get in touch with LL Bean, and they behaved exactly as you would hope LL Bean would. They took it very seriously, immediately addressed the issue, deemed it inappropriate, and put a stop to it. In fact, so quickly that within a week, you couldn't even find mention of it in
Is this a
Google.
recent activity?
This was the past, I'll say, 4 weeks we managed to bring this.
Yeah,
As a result of that.
thank you.
So I think there's a vigilance, there is a need for an ongoing committee. I think maybe we were ahead of our time years ago when we started the council, because now I think there really is a need for folks to politely and diplomatically reach out to groups who are offering it up as a dog walking haven or a spot for organized hiking events. I note that your own town bylaws prohibit without permit groups
On
of
our
15 or
property.
more.
Only
Yes.
on our property.
And I just think that there's good thought needs to go into this, and kind of eternal vigilance needs to be applied. And Carlisle would very much like to be a part of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You,
Thank you.
you made, out in the hallway on the table there are these green cards, which
Okay.
are the things that people here.
There's one.
Here we go. Pass that on down. I don't know what our decision is going to be about including Carlisle, but you may as well fill one of those out.
And to whom does that go?
It goes to Ruth, it's right there.
It's one-stop
And you
shopping.
might, one last thing is you might have heard earlier, we suggested that Chris get a hold of
Tim Goddard.
Tim, and so you might,
No, I made a note to reach out to Tim Goddard before you reached out to him. So I will do so.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Justin? Up to the microphone, please, and introduce yourself.
I'm Justin King, 9 Wright Farm.
You might twist the neck on that thing down a little bit. There you go.
This one.
Yeah.
First of all, I just wanted to thank the select board. I think that the idea of forming a committee and taking this issue seriously is really important. I think you're going about it the right way. It could have been the case that the changes were just made and that was that, but we're going to investigate it. I think it's especially important, I just want to reiterate that I really think this is a issue that's bigger than just Estabrook. I mean, I think when you look at woods access or you look at turning a public road into private, almost a private road by restricting parking, that affects the whole town. That affects, I mean, if they can do it on Estabrook, why can't they do it on Monument? Why can't they do it elsewhere? So I think there's a huge precedent, and the ramifications for this are much larger than just this specific issue. And I just wanted to reiterate that. I did have some questions. I just wondered, how is the nomination and appointment process going to work for the 3 private citizens?
do you have a green card on file?
He's on the committee.
I do, but I mean, I'm just not asking for myself. I'm just wondering how that's going to work. Is that-
So we will put out the call for people who would like to be on this committee to please fill out a green card. They can do that in one of 2 ways. They can do the physical green card, which we just handed Nick over there, or you can go to the town website and find your way to the online green card and fill that out, and indicate that you want to be part of the Estabrook Woods Committee. And once we have our volunteers in, to the extent that we're looking for volunteers from particular committees, we'll go to the chair of that committee, like the Natural Resources Commission, for example, and ask them to please let us know who they would like to send us, because some of them already have dual responsibilities. And then perhaps we will be oversubscribed, and then we will try to mix, as we've said we will in the charge, backgrounds, perspective, different kinds of expertise, so that we
Geography.
get and geography
Right.
in town, so that we get a good mix of people to represent the diversity of views and the diversity of interests that we have here in town.
Okay, so just a vote eventually by the select board, obviously, about who's gonna be those three citizens.
Yes.
I would just really stress, you talked about publicizing, I mean, I just think that there's a real deficiency in how clearly and how widely the meetings related to this issue be publicized. I got an email from Ruth Lauer just a couple days ago that said, you know, I'm notifying you because you happen to write me. There's a lot of people who I don't know what their email address is, and I just think that this is not, I mean, I had 6 or 7 friends who were very interested in this issue that did not know about the previous meeting, that did not know about this meeting. So I don't know, I guess if there's just a way to more clearly notify the public about, you know, this issue, it's just not getting out there. I assume it's just on the regular agenda and everyone's supposed to read the select board agenda every week and that's how they're supposed to know, or is there any other way?
You know, I would love to have a conversation about communications, because we do communicate in a number of different ways. We use the Concord Journal, we use the news and notices. Anyone in town may subscribe to news and notices, which is, I think I remember telling Mr. Old about that.
There are
where
1,000 subscribers.
There are 900 subscribers right now, and that sends out big information. You don't get spammed with information.
And
Well,
we
have
did send out a news and notice
On
bulletin
this
on
Friday.
this meeting.
Right.
But
this one we
the
even
point is
asked.
still well taken.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
communicating
Right.
is the hardest thing in the world to do. You think you're doing a great job, you do all of those things,
And
and
people
then
don't know.
somebody who's involved in the town already comes in and goes, what?
So we need to hear how people get information.
Right.
You know, we're thinking, we send it out through ways we think people hear, and if it's not getting to you, and you hear because we had your name from a meeting and we're sending something out directly to you, help us. You know,
So,
how do you get information?
That was gonna be my next question, is tell us where you might have seen, or your friends who
Right.
would have liked to have come, might have seen information that this meeting, that this issue was being
Yeah,
discussed
I reached
tonight.
out to you, and I was one of the people who reached out to you, and then I got heard directly back from the selectmen and never heard about it. Otherwise, I guess if you form a committee, could there be a page or a place where if everybody knew that there was a committee formed, that, you know, that agenda and stuff, they could just go to a specific webpage and.
Absolutely,
Right,
yes.
yes.
The town-
So that would work.
There'll be,
That
and
would work.
every committee has, and
Yeah, so
all
that
the
would totally
documents are
solve the
posted.
problem. I mean, if everybody knew there was a committee formed, you go to this webpage, I
Right.
think that solves the problem.
And typically, when we form a committee like this and it is going to hold a public hearing, they will pick that date pretty far in advance and the place, and they'll let the Concord Journal know that they're having it, and they'll put it on agendas. It'll be on agendas for a while, and it'll be in the news and notices if you subscribe to that.
It'll probably be tweeted and possibly on the Facebook page for Concord.
And we also have, don't we have the week's public meetings posted somewhere?
Yep, on the
Right.
front page of the website. Yep.
It's on the front page of the website, and it's also physically downstairs in the townhouse. And where else do we put it? There's somewhere else we put it too. I don't
And
remember.
still people are going.
That's in the police station.
Right.
So if you happen to be in a police station,
I think once the committee's formed, if everyone knows there's a committee and there's a page,
Yeah.
then they know where.
Every committee has a page.
Okay. Just a couple of other quick questions. Do the ex officios members have voting status on the committee? No, so they're just there to comment and advise? Okay.
provide information, provide facts, help the committee think about
Sure.
things.
And I mean, I respect the police department extensively, but I think that they have a certain agenda to solve this quickly. It may not reflect all the different issues at stake, so I'm just concerned that, I mean, it's fine if they're just gonna advise.
Okay.
And the final question, I guess, is just when you pick the 3 citizens at large, I mean, I do think that just, as you said, geography matters. Certainly having some people who directly abut is important. I've spoken to some of the owners. I've corresponded, email with them. I'm somebody who's in favor of access, but what they're facing is very serious. There's some very there's some criminal behavior going on. It has to be a balanced solution. There's just no question. But we want to make sure that I mean, they should, you know, that the people who are advised in this committee are looking at the long-term precedent. Obviously, a homeowner that's dealing with this situation right now may not be thinking about what this means 20 years from now for the whole town. So I think you got to make sure that if you have 2 homeowners that are close, that's great, but the rest of the committee members should at least be people who don't have a extremely vested interest that's obviously so particular that they might be skewed in one way or another. Although I want to just reiterate, the issues are serious, and I understand the concerns of the people who live close to that.
Right.
Thank you. I think
Thank
you've done
you
a
so
great
much.
thing going, and you're taking it seriously. I want to thank you again.
Thank you for coming. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment on the charge? Okay.
I just want to reiterate some of what Nick said.
Name and address, please.
Ellie Bemis, 858 Monument Street. And what I see missing in the committee is the fact that the largest landowner is not represented, Harvard, and the trustees of reservations who hold the easement. So that sort of shows me, and having it, I can see how the whole thing has come up over the access issue, so that's what the committee's formed around. But it seems like what's really needed is a revival of the Estabrook Council or a Estabrook Stewardship Committee. It's really, how do we take care of the woods, and in a balanced way. I mean, I can see how some are concerned that suddenly parking is limited and people are feeling shut out. But you have to also remember that the woods were, Harvard bought the woods as a field station, and that's what landowners who joined in and added their land gave it for a field station. And if we have infinite amounts of people, there isn't going to be a field station, there aren't going to be the woods that are what it's about. So somehow I think it really is important to, and it's going to be important with all conservation lands, that access is limited, and it's sort of, early bird gets the worm. Not that we want to exclude people from enjoying Concord, but it'll just be trampled. So somehow I'd like to see Harvard and the woods themselves represented in the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ellie, I think that's a really good point, and perhaps, we'll talk about what we do in response to that, but I do want to point out to you that we have specifically identified the environment as one of the interested stakeholders to be considered in figuring out what to do.
I like seeing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, go on.
Hi there.
Sit up here and introduce yourself to us, please.
I'm Lisa Pohl of Laurel Street in Concord. I think this is a tremendously wonderful idea, this committee forming. I feel like it gives us, the public at large, the opportunity to get our voices heard. Up until this point, I feel like it's been the residents and the police. I may be incorrect on that, but that has been my feeling. The signs were put up. I, like previous residents, have felt like I haven't been in the loop of what's going on. And this committee gives us the opportunity to get, as I said, our voices heard. And I really appreciate it. Ms. Reese, I think it's a great idea. I think that, simply put, that is great. And I hope that it forms. I do agree with the previous speaker that, the 3 members at large representing the vast public may be a little shy of what, it would be optimal to represent the public. Because it's not only Concord, it's it's the surrounding towns, it's everyone that loves to enjoy the woods. I absolutely do feel like, the residents have absolutely endured a tremendous amount of increase in traffic, and the behavior issues are need to be dealt with. But at this juncture, for the purposes of this committee, I think it's pertinent to stay focused on parking and access to the Estabrook Woods. And that's my feeling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Is there anybody else we haven't heard from that? Concord? Didn't see that hand, that was very.
Joan Ferguson. Is there any stacking going to be provided for this committee?
Good question. Yeah, should take that up for a discussion.
Yes.
Staffing in terms of administrative assistants, I'm sure that will happen, but there's three of our highest level department heads.
That's a good
Right,
question.
right.
Just Carmen's suggestion.
Any other comments?
One more.
Wait, is there anybody else who'd like to speak? We've heard from Mr. Jameson, so, yep, let's come forward.
Susanna Kay on Estabrook Road. There are two issues. I agree with a lot of what people said. Yeah, they're dogs, but the question of Estabrook Road's access for Concord residents and increasing the number of out-of-towners, as well as attendant issues with bringing in people. One of the main problems that was of significant concern that started this was the dealing of heroin at the bottom of Estabrook Road, and the police chief has that. They've sorted it all out. So that was also happening in the woods and inside, just off of the public land. So although it's great to feel one can bound the problem with parking or access, once the public actually leaves the public road and they've left those inanimate steel objects in whatever location, that same public is now going into private land on some area of public access. Some discussion would be of interest regarding jurisdiction and control of some order and maintenance of some of the laws. Like, how do you get someone into, if you ask a public person on public access on private land, please don't do something, they'll tell you to pound sand. Who's going to sort this out? And it would be appreciated if that could be added as well. Because, I mean, it's an extreme example, but it was there, and you can speak with the police chief. He was very involved with me, helping us control that. Thank you.
Thank you. I would certainly hope that the police chief, being an ex officio member of this group, will make sure that folks are aware of those kinds of things which maybe a narrower group of people know about.
Is there anybody else we haven't heard from? Is your comment related to the charge only, Mr. Jameson? You're the only other hand I see. This is only where discussion is about the charge.
Okay, I think it's related to the charge.
Only the charge.
Okay.
We've heard a lot of your opinion.
I'll be very brief.
Okay.
I just wondered if part of the charge should be to appear before the town meeting and ask for some guidance at the town meeting. How does the town feel about restricting access?
There will be opportunities and a requirement of this committee that there be public hearings where public can attend and discuss, but I'm not sure town meeting is the venue.
Well, they will file a report,
Right.
the annual town report as well.
And depending upon what the committee might recommend and the board might approve, final approval of some actions of the select board would require action at town meeting.
That's true. And Mr. Jameson, I would add that this might be a committee where there's a broad enough interest that we would ask CCTV to film and broadcast the public hearing.
Absolutely.
That the group
That
holds
on
on.
the
Then that,
communication issue too.
Exactly.
That might be a
Yeah.
good thing to.
and that's very helpful because then you don't have to show up at the actual hearing. You can watch it later when it works for you, and then you've got the email addresses of all the people
That's a good
on the
idea.
committee, so you can get in touch with them if you have something you want to say.
And I have to also add that over the past year or two, we've changed the public hearing process so that somebody who can't attend the public hearing can oftentimes email their thoughts, comments, or questions.
In real
Taken
time.
up in real time, taken up at the hearings.
I think Did Ellie have a hand up?
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
And just on the,
You have
Up to the
to-
microphone,
microphone.
please. It's because you're on television, so people in the audience watching might want to hear
No,
you.
no telling jokes, though.
I mean, I think the whole, we are all walking in the core of Estherbrook Woods out of the goodness of Harvard and their fuel station. You know, and we are sort of all acting like we have a town right, you know, but we are, they are allowing us, and I think it needs to be sort of reframed, because it's their land, the core of the woods. Yes, Punktasset is the town's, but the core of the woods is Harvard's field station.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we've now heard from everyone who had a hand up. I think we heard some good thoughts and conversation, things that I think this board will take under consideration as we look at the charge one more time. I would hope that we'd be able to probably finalize a charge perhaps at our next meeting.
Well,
I think the charge is ready
I
right now.
think we might be able to do it now. I think based on the comments that we've just heard, I think it will be important to include in the section on duties and responsibilities for the committee a specific obligation for the committee to contact and coordinate with Harvard, Middlesex, and the trustees of reservations, all of whom are stakeholders here.
Yeah.
And it might be a bit much to ask those entities to participate on our committee, but certainly
Should be invited.
if they are informed
Right.
and invited, they can certainly attend all of the committee's meetings if they wish. And if they don't wish, then we need to be making an affirmative exercise of
I
going
think
to
that's a
the.
good idea, but let me ask if it could be handled in a slightly different way rather than amending the charge of the committee. Could we sort of ask the chair or somebody on the board here to contact those entities, let them know that this activity is going forward, and if they would like to participate, it's similar to Carlisle, we don't really, we can't tell them to show up, but we could certainly ask the chair if she would contact the entity.
Well, I don't know, I actually would be in favor of just adding another number, perhaps between 3 and 4, or between 2 and 3, that said to solicit input from Harvard University, the Middlesex School, and the trustees of reservations, period. And that leaves that open, that they just will solicit input from those individuals. And I think you're right that at the beginning of the process, you would let the chair know, please do that up front in the process. Just so we have them specifically
Let's
identified.
just consider that
Item number
stuck in
30.
there.
Yeah, I just
that's
added
fine.
that. And the reason that I think that, Mike, is that,
I don't have any, I don't have any.
yeah, but having thought about it, I think that if I were in charge of the field station for Harvard University and I read this charge and I saw no mention of my institution here, that might bother me. So I think it's true, we should have it in there.
You win.
Thank you.
So I just added it to my version number 4.
I think Ellie Davis wins that.
Okay, I'll let you win.
Do we want to also include mention of the Estherbrook Council?
It doesn't seem to exist at this point.
I
and
think it's a little too amorphous at the moment.
Yeah, but I think
But
we should
reaching
not
out to
lose
the
sight of it.
stakeholders.
I think the committee will reach out to
Yeah.
all stakeholders.
So, have we decided about Carlisle representation?
We do have to talk about that, don't we? Well, I think that we've decided that the town managers will talk to each other.
I think
And-
my suggestion was let's do that. If in fact, when they have discussed that the town manager for Carlisle has an idea, no, we'd really like to see somebody on this committee or a representative, we can come back and put them
Amend
on.
the
Because they're
charge.
gonna be,
The other thing, well, the other question is, if we do have someone from Carlisle on the committee, do they need to be a full voting member, or could they be an ex officio member?
I would suggest they be ex officio, represent.
In which case, we can indicate someone from Carlisle as an ex officio member representing Carlisle, and if Carlisle doesn't wish to put such person forward, no, you're not comfortable with that.
I'd rather ask them first so we don't put
Fair.
them on and
Yeah,
then
that's
have them not
Okay.
show up and somebody
Yeah,
goes. "Well,
that's
Carl."
Yeah, okay, I agree. You win.
Let's go home then.
Moving right along.
We're even now, we should stop.
All right.
Move to adopt the charge of the Estabrook Woods Access Committee substantially as discussed, and to begin staffing the committee.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming, and you're welcome to stay the rest of the meeting if you're interested too, so it doesn't look like it.
Really,
Thank you all for the opportunity for a scintillating conversation.
liaison assignments are really juicy. You know. I'm around for that.
We're to Junction Village.
And we're not going to do Junction Village, is that we're going to skip that?
So that's a question. Are we
hearing about
So-
Junction Village? or
Tell me
putting it
about
off?
Junction Village.
I don't know if Steve is prepared. Barbara is here, I think.
I'm here.
Yeah. So,
Barb and Terry are probably more.
Tell me, was there nothing now?
No, I couldn't make it.
Oh, all right. Well, I can update you in any way that you would like.
So let's do a little update
A little update.
with Junction Village.
As long as I'm here. Barbara Morse, 1975 Main Street, representing Concord Housing Development Corporation. So I think I last met with you all in the early fall, when we were finally working with some hard numbers on what it is likely going to cost to build a completely affordable assisted living on land that was given to CHGC by the state about 3 years ago now. I think it's important to acknowledge that when we first put proposals out after that land was transferred to CHGC, we cast as wide a net as we possibly could at the time to anyone who did affordable housing development in Massachusetts, and we essentially said, tell us what you think should go here. We put no limits on it. We didn't tell them it had to be this kind of building or that kind of building or this kind of housing or that kind of housing, because we didn't really know what could go there feasibly. And based on the proposals that we got back, and then following lots of meetings in town and with various other groups, we have ended up with the proposal that we think is best suited to both what will work for the town and what the town needs, and is likeliest to work on that site, is this assisted living. The proposal that came from the Grantham Group, which is the group that we hope will build, when they sent the proposal first to us 3 years ago, it was a concept. It was not, none of them were fully fleshed out. I said to somebody, some of the proposals we got were lovely notebooks with beautiful pictures and all kinds of, some were 2 pages of typewritten material. People just, they send concepts out all the time. So when they came then to run hard numbers for us, the numbers between the concept and the reality of trying to build this in what will likely be around 2018, given the various grant applications that they have to go through at the state level for tax credits, there was a difference there between the concept number and the proposed real number of about $3 million. We were enormously grateful to get the support of this board to move forward and figure out how this can now be built. And then the board appointed a task force to look at how to fund that. And that task force has been meeting since around Thanksgiving time, once a month, tossing around different ideas, trying to figure out what's the likeliest way to, we refer to it as a gap, but it isn't really fair to call it a gap because that implies that there was a hard figure to begin with, and now somehow or other that number has changed, when in fact there was no hard figure to begin with. But now that we have good solid numbers, the Grantham Group, about 8 or 10 months ago now,
was starting to build a similar development in Northampton on the old state hospital grounds, a very different piece of property than one we have in Concord, because it had all of the infrastructure already available. We have no infrastructure available. We don't even have electricity, or we didn't have access. It spent us a long time to get access. But it became clear to them then that construction costs had dramatically increased from when they had first put the concept out to us. We also had some unbelievably positive conference calls with DHCD, Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level, who were very complimentary both of Grantham. They essentially said they are the only developer that we will award tax credits to for affordable housing for assisted living, affordable housing, because they are the only group who's figured out how to make it work. And they were very complimentary to Concord for how well they have done in developing affordable housing in general. And I think it's important for us to understand that the only reason that we're even going to be allowed to apply for tax credit, affordable assisted living, which is not the top of the state's priority list, is because we've done a really good job so far, and because we, at this date, when the applications go in, are still above the state mandated 10% SHI. So those two things together. So the Fund Task Force has been meeting, and in the last two meetings, I believe, they have come to a framework where they think that roughly $3 million could come from. And I think it's also important to remember that we had preliminary conversations with DHCD before all of this started, even before you folks voted to support the project in principle. And the state was pretty clear before we negotiate all about how much money we're giving to the town to build it. You need to show us how much the town is willing to come forward with. And there's essentially they put together a package that they think will likely work. And I think it's fine. There's no secret about the package. It would be a combination of free cash, a multiple year application to community preservation, probably 3 years, roughly $350,000 each year, similar to what we did for Peter Bulkley. Understanding that you can't promise that if you get it 1 year, you're going to get it the next. That's free cash. Housing Foundation will be happy to do a campaign directed specifically at supporting Junction Village. There are some grant programs. I think there are the Home Project, Terry? Okay, I think it's the Home Project, but don't quote me on that, which is specifically designed. They are grants that come to towns specifically for developing infrastructure costs. And so we will look at that. And then there may be a little bit of other sort of loose change floating around there. So in our minds, I'm just an advisor to the funding task force, we're pretty close to $2.5 million between free cash, community preservation, Concord Housing Foundation, and some other foundation and other applications for grant monies. So that's where we are right now.
What's the free cash target, the number you've got?
No more than $1 million.
No more than that.
Tony has said $1 million would be the cap.
So I have a question about the high cost of infrastructure for this site, and that being one of the issues for Grantham in thinking about how to develop it. I just wonder whether there's I don't know whether this has been within things the committee is thinking about, whether they're only thinking about cash or whether they're thinking also about potential synergies. Maybe there's some of this work, and the town manager is just beginning to look at me.
In other words, have we talked to DPW, et cetera? We have, and they're in conversations with them.
Or it could be done in-house.
We talked about that. And historically, that has occurred, but that occurred before we had enterprise funds. And enterprise funds change the dynamic around how they are allowed to do in-kind isn't quite the right way to put it, but we absolutely are in conversation with them. I think the other thought is that, well, two things. One, the infrastructure cost is different for this. I'm not sure it's fair to say that it's high compared with other projects. It's just that there was no infrastructure for this project.
Right, I understand.
Yeah. But I think that the home grants, just not HomeWorks, I think it's HomeWorks. My understanding is that that essentially would take the place because they are specifically designed to help fund infrastructure needs. And that would probably, because it would have to be a combination of Grantham applying with DPW or the light plant or whoever else it might be involved to make the application for that. And that might be the way they work around that.
That's great. Okay. Well, I should have known that that particular possibility had not been overlooked.
People have tried to look at everything, we've said, gee, how about throw a concert? But I just heard tonight on the news that the Eagles have played their last concert. So I guess we'll have to take that one off the table.
Well,
So, I really do think we're making, I think we're making progress.
well, that sounds like you're kind of within striking distance, so,
I think that we are.
yeah.
I haven't always felt that way, but I think the last two meetings, and in fairness, we meet again Wednesday morning, so if there's anything
Yeah,
different.
I remember the initial meetings. It was quite the educational learning curve for members of the committee because, Grantham comes in and people perceive them as, you're a developer and you're short,
Right.
$3 million. And it took some time to kind of just explain where those costs were coming from.
I think the other piece that that CHDC is starting to work on is that whatever building goes on this site is going to
Needs
take up a
infrastructure.
relatively small
Right,
amount of space. There are 12 acres, maybe it takes 2.5 to 3 acres of it, at tops. So then the rest of it is allowed to be, according to the legislation, is allowed to be used for open space. So we've now approached, and I was not at last week's board meeting, I was away, but Jennifer Goldson, who has done some workshops specifically around affordable housing needs for the town, we've asked her to put together a proposal to start to do that process for, all right, now what do we do with the open space? What could be used there? It was an interesting discussion to just listen to in terms of access, et cetera. But how do we use that? And how do we get people's ideas and thoughts involved so that once the project is ready to really move forward, it moves forward on both fronts together as a unit, not a building and then, then there's some other land over here that we have to think about. But that goes forward as one whole project.
So would you imagine that there might be funds available that would look different when you added other uses for the other portions
Well,
of?
there's a little bit of money, I think, included in that. I think that figure initially came from talks with Marcia in the planning office. On the other hand, I think that if there was a sizable chunk of money that was needed, and frankly, I doubt there's going to need to be substantial development of any kind for the remaining land, but it'll need some tidying up, so to speak, maybe a walking path. I don't really know. That might be a different application to CPC under the, do we have a recreation? Yeah, recreation.
Right.
I'm trying to think, do we have that? There are three.
Yes.
And then there's
One of the
fourth.
buckets.
One of the buckets, right. But we don't know that until we see what it is, how people might want to have that land be used.
I know that when I was on the West Concord Advisory Committee, there was extensive discussion about the additional land.
Right.
And what.
Right. Yeah, we're still very much in conversation with them. I almost wanted to suggest to the Estabrook, how do we hear about what's going on? I don't know how they do it, but the people on the West Concord Advisory Committee have the best method of letting people know that there are meetings going on in town. They put
get 'em in
signs
here.
up, they get 150 people to come to any individual meeting, so maybe you could talk to whoever's doing their publicity.
Well, that's a great update.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you,
Thank you so
Barbara.
much.
All right, our next agenda item is to take a look at town meeting matters. We have a number of things to discuss. The The first item is to take positions on warrant articles. There are 2 warrant articles that the dollar value has changed since we voted some number of weeks ago. And I think we are now required to re-vote those 2 items. They're Article 17 and Article 25. Article 17 is the Minuteman project.
It went
budget.
down,
It
right?
did. Congratulations, Carmen.
Had nothing to do with me, but it went down.
Is that a first?
It could be.
And so what is the current number? Do we know?
$423,444.
I move that we recommend affirmative action on Article 17 in the amount of $423,444.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. And Article 25. Article 25 is,
Cemetery?
Article 25 is the cemetery roadway infrastructure and drainage improvements. This dollar figure has also gone down, and it is because the finance director was able to use balances on past bond issues in accordance with the general laws, thereby reducing the borrowing authorization from $150,000 to just $50,000.
Wow.
So our next,
So does that mean the finance director gets a bonus?
I sent them an email.
That's good, he got an email, that's
And I
fantastic.
thought you had to rescind those things, you don't?
He didn't, I think he didn't rescind them because he knew there was going to be further investment needed. So there were, 7 or 8 old borrowings with small amounts that added up to a substantial amount.
repurpose them?
And he'll close those out, and they can be repurposed, yes.
That's
For
great.
anything for which you may borrow for a cemetery.
Rates have probably gone up a little bit too, so probably there's some
There's some savings.
carrying costs.
I
Wise
move that
fiscal
we
management.
Recommend affirmative action on Article 25 in the amount of $50,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's great. Thank you for those 2. So are there I missed the last meeting. Are there positions that this board, I believe, had not taken a position? Some of the thinking from my debriefing was that the board would take positions at town meeting. Is that something we want to reconsider or
Well,
have a
two
discussion?
petitions I think we can deal with. We were waiting for the light board to make recommendations on Article 44 and Article 46, but in the meantime, and they did, but in the meantime, we've learned that the petitioners do not intend to move either of those articles. So
So no
we
motion
don't have
required.
So no motion expected.
Right.
Motion expected on Article number 44 or Article number 46. I will say, though, that I think the town moderator, they're going to actually withdraw their motion at town meeting.
Okay.
For Article 44.
No,
No,
for
Article
46.
46.
46, right.
But Mr. Fuld has
There's no
informed,
intention of speaking at town
has no
meeting.
intention of speaking and
Very
intends to
considerate.
withdraw his article.
Okay.
So we don't need to deal with those. And the others that we were waiting on were the neonicotinoid pesticide article, Article 48, and polystyrene
Right.
food ones.
And on the neonicotinoid pesticides,
Neonics for short.
we are awaiting a recommendation by the Agriculture Committee and I think also by the Board of Health.
Right.
And I know that the Agriculture Committee has had a bit of difficulty scheduling their meeting. They had to change it around a little bit, so they have not made a recommendation yet. So I think that still needs to be
Okay.
until.
I want to raise another issue with respect to that article, and that is this article potentially, I don't know what the right word is, but out of order because it would be in conflict with existing state laws? No?
No, and I think that what the petitioner, well, first of all, even if a town meeting action would be swatted down by the Attorney General's office as inconsistent with state law, you still get to do it at town meeting. But
We've had that happen
Right.
before.
Yes.
but in fact, the petitioner here is quite aware of the conflict or the supremacy issues, preemption issues with state law as well as federal law. And I believe that he is working hard on crafting a motion which narrows the effect of his petition to perhaps focus on education or gathering of data. It may well be something that we will wish to support by the time he's finished crafting it and it gets to the floor of town meeting. And I know that he has been trying to, there have been some good conversations between the petitioner and the Agriculture Committee. Because these issues impact heavily on conventional farmers,
Sure.
and so there've been there may end up being a motion that the Agriculture Committee can support.
So it would be an amendment that might be offered. And what about with the same kind of general issue with the polystyrene? I had heard that there may be a potential change in that motion that would make it more,
Right.
less comprehensive, focusing on cups and lids or something. Have we learned?
I
haven't heard anything.
not heard anything yet.
I'll be meeting with the petitioner tomorrow, I think, so.
I got a request as well to meet, perhaps we could do one meeting. I just want to acknowledge that the issue with neonicotinoids is you are correct in positioning this as a conflict oftentimes between agriculture and beekeepers. And there was an article in this week's Boston Globe, or last week's Boston Globe,
Yes.
acknowledging that there are difference of opinions because neonicotinoids are needed for many agricultural processes, and you can use them effectively at certain periods of time. And this is also the same conflict that's arisen at the federal level between the regulatory agency and the Department of Agriculture, the USDA.
Yeah, and interestingly, the introduction of these neonics was viewed, I think, by EPA at the time as a great advancement
Improvement.
because you can use so much less of this pesticide than of the alternatives that were used previously. And, the jury may still be out on what the effect really is, and I don't know.
I agree.
Okay.
Are there other, wait a minute, if I'm correct, or maybe the board took a position on the zoning article regarding the bank property, perhaps?
Article 41.
Article 41.
Yeah.
Did the board
Limited.
take a position on that?
Laurel doesn't have a record of the board taking a position.
My notes say he referred to town meeting, and I think we were trying to do a little fact-finding before that point, that time. So maybe I can make a call.
Yeah. Well, this one was, we were a little confused about this because it seemed that the planning board itself was of several minds about this article, and there were a number of questions and potential issues that were raised at the hearing, and I think that it seemed to us that we should wait and
Yes.
hear
Right.
more about this before drawing our own conclusion.
But I was asking the venue for hearing more. Did we want to invite Marcia or someone to help us understand this particular bylaw proposal at our next meeting?
If we meet on the 28th, I would certainly see no harm in that if Marcia doesn't mind one more evening meeting right before town meeting.
I think it's important for us if we can do it, because then it would give the petitioner, if it turns out we supported it, if a handout was gonna be prepared. it would-
Right, this is the
Not-
planning board, right,
yeah,
yes,
the
no,
planning board
I
would give them a
agree that
chance
we
to
could, right.
say that.
Right.
And then our position would be clear at the commencement of discussion at,
Yep.
so I agree, that would be better.
Okay.
Okay, so let's ask.
She-
Okay,
Conference call in too. I mean,
Yeah. Or maybe a member, if there's
How
a member of the
modern.
planning
yeah,
board.
great idea.
WebEx it in.
How about that?
But do we have to publicly notice? Oh, Marcia wouldn't have to be here, she could conference in for this?
Right,
Or,
as long as the public can hear.
her, yeah,
That's
that's,
fine.
I'm game.
She
We
could be
can
right
put her
up
up
on that
there on the
screen,
big
yeah.
screen.
No,
maybe.
she'd have to have a, unless she's,
Skype, yep.
I'm sure she'd love that.
If there's visuals.
let's just see if we can figure it out.
That would be
Yeah, there we go.
She is larger than life.
Yes, actually.
The many arms of.
Okay, so let's
Whatever
see
makes
if
your
we can
life
make that
easier.
work for the next
Yeah.
meeting. So we've taken positions now on all of these articles. Are there particular articles that people, this board wishes to make a comment on? We need to decide that, and I will let the moderator know which ones we are interested in commenting. Are there,
Well, I think there are some that, some we're gonna have to, I think.
Well, as I'm looking at the list, the first article that I see that perhaps the board would wish to make a statement on is Article 16. And I would suggest not Jane.
I think
I'd be happy to do
I
that
think the
one.
chair should do that.
Great, that's great.
I'm happy to do that one.
And I think that on Article 18, we have Carrie as the presenter, and I think for sure we need to have a comment on
Yeah.
that, and I would do
I
that.
would hope that you would say that.
Absolutely.
Who else?
Historically, we haven't said much about the community preservation.
We usually don't.
We usually don't.
I think we should be prepared if the issue of the church comes up, but I think only
yeah.
if it becomes an issue. But then I think we should be prepared to say, yes, we thought that might be an issue, and here's what we did, and we don't think it is. A little bit more fulsome than that. but-
The next one I would see is Article 23, and Chris, what is the status of Balls Hill Road?
So that's Article, I'm sorry, 23. Good question. I have a call in. We're in the process, we did commission an appraisal, which the board asked for, and John Avery's in the middle of doing that. I hope that's ready in a couple of weeks. And I credit Marcia
As
and
in
Elizabeth.
before town meeting?
Right. The
Excellent.
goal is to have it ready for town meeting. And then Jeff Wien has contacted me, and I haven't had a chance to connect with him, so I don't
So
actually.
Okay.
I think that if we are gonna move this, that one of us needs to have something to say about this.
As well as the town manager who will be presenting the article?
Yes.
Would you want,
Yes.
okay?
Well, I would think so.
Okay. Okay.
Anybody volunteering?
I'm happy to volunteer. I was gonna volunteer to go back to the community preservation and volunteer to, if need be,
If needed.
whip that into shape and do it.
Okay, so.
Okay, so
like
you'll
lots
be
of
on deck for that one?
Provisional speakers.
Yes, he's on
Yeah.
standby.
And I'm happy to do the Balls Hill.
CPC, Mike on standby.
Now, when we get down to Article 28, Chris, do you think that there is any reason for the select board to speak on this issue, given the controversy it has created with our neighbor in town?
I think that might be helpful if you, Public Works Department will be making the presentation, not me. I did the solar at the special town meeting, but I think
Yep.
Rich Rain or Alan.
I
Cook-
would be happy to,
You want to do NAGOG?
I'd be happy to speak on that. I've been
Okay.
the liaison to Public Works. And,
All right, you're down, NAGOG,
on 29
and 30.
and 30,
I'll be happy to take those two.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Would you like the draft now?
I was careful all week.
Okay, Steve, got that one.
Okay, 32.
Yes, I think we should do that.
We need to talk about that. And I wonder, maybe Jane should take that one. Have you been?
I'm the liaison. I've been working on the
Oh,
demo
to the
delay for
historical
the,
commission.
and I've been
Right, I was
working with
thinking
them for the
historic
last 3 years.
Committee, yes, okay. All right, so that one's Alice's.
Has the board taken a position on that?
Did we?
We have.
Do we? I don't have it in my notes, don't have
Affirmative.
it.
Oh, yeah, we
Affirmative
recommended
action.
affirmative
Okay.
action.
Yeah.
Just making sure. All right, I would like to speak on the demo review.
Okay.
Sorry, Jane.
Right.
I've been involved with writing this since the first
Right.
round.
What about,
FAR is probably
Yeah, I think
the
the
biggest.
square
planning board
footage one is
So the FAR,
that's
Yeah.
42, right?
42,
Article
yeah.
42.
And you haven't taken a position on it yet.
Can you take a
No, we
position?
didn't.
that's what
We
it is.
did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What was your
I'm sorry.
position?
Affirmative action.
42 is affirmative action.
Oh, you had to
Yeah.
recuse yourself.
I recused
That's
myself,
right.
so I didn't know what you did. See, that was a totally effective recusal. I
There we
didn't
go.
even
No,
know what
you're
you
obviously not going to speak on this one. Who would like to speak on FAR? I'd be happy to do so. If somebody else wants it, you're welcome to have it.
Steve, you've got some expertise there.
As the architect on the,
Yeah, you get your slide rule out.
You want to do that one?
Sure.
That's 42.
I think we need to talk about the sign bylaw amendments.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think,
we should.
I think so.
We should.
So, Jane, you don't have anything yet. How do you feel about sign bylaw
I
amendments?
am happy to do that,
Yeah.
since it sort of emanated from my neighborhood.
All right,
I-
that's perfect.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
44, no motion expected. 45. So somebody needs to be prepared to talk about that, whatever position we take, which means you have to write an affirmative action position and a no action
right.
position.
I'm happy to, I don't want to take a whole
Or does
slide,
someone
but I'm
take
happy to do
the
that.
affirmative and someone?
Oh, there you go.
But that might,
Can be
that
like
might
the
indicate
Republican
how our
debate.
vote would go.
It really depends on how this comes out.
Exactly.
If you're okay with me joining your meeting, I've been asked to also have a meeting with them. Perhaps it's easier for us to meet together tomorrow with the.
yeah, no, it's Friday, I'm sorry.
Friday,
At
okay.
3 o'clock.
Still might suggest would
So,
be
yeah,
easier.
3 o'clock on Friday.
So has somebody claimed 45?
I'm happy to do that as well.
Alice gets 45.
And anybody wants any of these, you can have them, because I don't need to be taking the floor.
How does the board feel about making a comment on Article 47? I'm not, I don't know. I think there are a lot of people who are concerned about this issue, and since we've recommended no action, it might be useful if we explained ourselves. But I don't have a strong feeling about it.
Well, I'm happy to do it as long as it's clear that the motivation for us taking no action was the firm assurance that we were never going to do this
Right.
within the
Right.
time frame, as opposed to a point of view
Right.
about whether or not there was any potential danger. So with that understanding of what our position would be, I mean, I'm happy to do it if you'd like me to, but I just want to be clear, that's what would say.
I'm okay with that.
I think that's the right comment.
Yep.
I think it will balance the conversation.
Whoops, your name came out, Ike, sorry.
Ike.
The M didn't come out.
Answered anything.
Neonics.
If we need to take, to speak on that, I would
Agriculture.
speak on it for the,
Okay.
But, and again, I don't know, until we see what that final motion looks like and until we know what the agricultural committee has to say.
But that's one, if he comes back with, motion that moves us, I think we can not only speak potentially in favor of it, but be grateful to the petitioner
Oh,
for
absolutely.
working to
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
get that done.
Like consent calendar stuff, water system expenditures, I don't think we need to
Bruce
talk
Freeman
about
Rail
that.
Trail?
That'd be our,
I don't feel like we need to talk about those, but I would obviously be the person if anybody feels that we should.
I think the town moderator can say the select board is
It's just an appropriation.
for affirmative action.
Yep.
There's nothing,
Okay.
I think we should all give the moderator a hand for getting 20-some odd
Yeah.
articles on the
On the
consent
consent
calendar.
calendar.
Bravo.
Town meeting's gonna be over in 2 nights?
Never, never.
Setting a high bar, Carmen.
Well, now that we're not meeting on
Maybe the venue
Sundays.
We'll be motivated.
Number 17.
That was it, right?
I
59?
think that's everything.
Nice.
So we have several backup.
Wait, what about the special town meeting within the annual town meeting?
The what?
I'm kidding.
There's still
That was
time.
the other
Is there
thing we
still
There's
don't
time?
still
While you're
time for
away.
more, is
Still
what you're
time.
Is that
saying.
special town meeting?
that extends it to 3,
Carmen, have
maybe
any
4
of the
days.
towns had the regularly scheduled town meeting and the debt from Minuteman been?
No, when we get to liaison reports, I went to the school building committee meeting tonight, and I can report to you
Oh.
on what's going on there.
All right, is there anything that we need to discuss about the items that were placed on the consent calendar? It's a very hefty consent calendar for a town meeting this year. Does anybody have thoughts or comments about that? The consent, that it's on our agenda to talk about? I don't want to overlook it if you have something burning.
I looked at them, I had a question that I had a chance to ask Carmen today, because I guess it just slipped my mind, that some of these articles on the consent calendar require 2/3 majority.
Right. So the consent calendar will require two-thirds.
Required to, and has that happened in the past and I
yes.
just haven't paid any attention?
Yep.
What are you gonna do?
Yep.
Just raise the ballot.
So it is a very hefty
You just paid
agenda.
attention to what mattered, which was the overwhelming
Very good.
support for everything on the
Very
consent
good.
calendar.
That's it,
the
that's
cheers.
it. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, and the rail trail easements is consent calendar.
Right.
So-
There's 2 other rail trail articles, but that one's on the consent.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so I don't see anything else that we would need to discuss for the,
And I take great comfort in the fact that I believe it's any 5 citizens who want to remove any item from the consent calendar to have it discussed. If they feel that it needs a broader debate, they can do that.
Sure.
yep. All right, ready for the next agenda item? I think we're done with talk, unless anyone else has something more to talk about town meeting warrant? The next item is to discuss we have 4 new committees, and we probably, at this point, thank you, Mike, for suggesting we need to assign the liaisons to the 4 committees. They are the Public-Private Partnership, the Energy Committee, the Estabrook Woods, and I'm forgetting one.
Long-range plan.
Long-range plan.
Comprehensive
And-
long
oh,
range.
Plan.
Comprehensive long-range plan. Okay, so we need committee
So you guys had
liaisons,
some nights free?
Yeah,
or days, some of these might be
Yeah.
daytime meetings.
Well, obviously, it's
Estabrook-
not going to be me for 80 years.
You do them all, ex officio.
That's true.
there's
I
a
can do them all for
recommendation
2
I'd like to
weeks.
make for one, and that is the Estabrook Woods one. I'd really suggest if you can see your way clear,
I believe that one is a daytime meeting,
it is.
which I would find because it's staffed. And I would, although I would enjoy doing that, I don't know that I could
Yeah,
commit to
let's just-
daytime meetings.
Recollecting the work you did on the White Pond one, and I thought, had a good solution.
And Steve, I don't think you have days either.
Barely got nights.
I know, I could see what time, Oh, I see a finger pointing at Jane. Is that what you're suggesting?
The Estabrook Wood Committee.
It's
Well-
it's likely to be daytime. And will likely be chair, so I think you can't take on
I'm
much
also
more.
constitutionally
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Equipped.
Not well equipped, ah. Well,
So,
I don't know.
let's look
You
at all,
seem to
let's
do
look at all of
okay.
these. Let's look in
Let's look at
context,
all of
look at
them.
all of them.
Yep.
The public-private partnership, energy, and the long-range plan. Public-private partnership. I assume that that's an evening meeting. Does anyone have a burning desire to do public-private partnership?
Give it to the new guy.
Yeah, give it to them.
I was going to say, we have another one in the room.
Excellent idea. First 4 committees on it.
I was going to say, I noticed somebody sinking in his chair.
No, I think that's
That's
good
a reasonable idea.
That's a good idea. That won't be, that ought to be in and out with a reasonable amount of time.
Is it defined study and
Right.
analysis of
Defined study.
recommendations to the town?
It'll also be really interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a
Oh,
legal
absolutely.
background will be useful.
I think it'd be great.
So
And a fresh face.
good.
The Energy Committee, we have many of us interested in Energy Committee.
Well, I know that this has been something that you really put together and had vision for. I think that you would be a natural liaison as it comes together.
Unless it's a
Second.
daytime meeting, and when I have to really figure out how to, there is an interest in having this meet. I mean, if it's a 8 o'clock, I might be able to. If it's at 5 o'clock, I might be able to, but at 2 o'clock, no way. And I know you've got an interest in this as well, so does Jane.
I'm happy to do it, but primarily because I just think it's going to be pretty interesting stuff. But I don't.
I am torn between
Long-range plan.
long-range plan and the.
I've got you pegged for long-range plan.
If she's willing to do the long-range plan, I mean, here's what my thinking. She's got the longest tenure
Well, that's,
Yeah.
potentially on the committee. And that would give us a chance to get it in place and get it
And she's been on the West
going,
Concord
and,
Advisory Committee.
So that'd give us some real select board continuity on that committee. And you participated in some of those early
Yep.
meetings
Yes.
about stuff like
Okay, so, Jane, long-range plan, energy, will duke it out depending on when this committee is charged to meet, and I would like to do it. And if it meets it, in the daytime, I won't be able to. So, let the committee help decide
If
that,
it's daytime, I'm happy to
yeah.
happy to do
And
it.
so have you assigned Estabrook Road?
Have we what?
Assigned Estabrook Road.
I'm looking at my notes, long-range plan, Jane, energy, Alice or Mike, public-private partnership, Tom, Estabrook Woods.
I could take that on as well, depending on how we re-divvy up.
We have to divvy up
You
all
know,
of our
it's all
assignments.
the
You need
rest
to
of it.
give up some things.
Right, right.
I can take back things, when I leave
Well,
this.
can I piggyback on that? I got from Ruth a list of the committee liaison assignments, and I don't think I sent them to you, but I will, with the notion of letting me know what's interesting, so maybe we can get kind of a kickstart
Yeah,
on.
great.
I just have to say, Mike, I really applaud you getting after this so early because
'Cause it can
many
drag.
years we have like this big gap where there's
late
like,
in the summer.
oh, it's in
Which
the
one
summer.
is-
Who's covering this meeting? So
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to try to
Excellent.
get a start on that, and also, just so you'll know, our goals.
Yeah, great.
Because those are two things that if you don't watch them,
Excellent.
pretty soon it's September, and
That's great.
Yeah,
Go for
so-
it.
Goalless.
so I'll send a note out to everybody.
You might want to start with that conversation for you, what committees or boards you are willing to give up, because you will take on FinCom and school committee. And so
Yeah,
that's,
I'll-
so you need to be able
Yeah.
to give up some.
I think you're going to have to reappoint somebody to the Financial Audit Advisory Committee. And
Right.
frankly, I think if I stayed on that, that would be easiest for the board, because I sort of know what that territory is
Yeah,
like. It's
yeah.
an easy subject matter for me. And
it fits well with the finance committee.
Yeah,
It
so
does, it's
know,
continuity.
so, and that's just easy, I mean, for me to do.
Okay,
And the other I've got two bigger committees, the light plant
yeah,
and natural resources. And the light plant is again in the daytime.
right.
And if I wind up playing a role in the energy task force, I'd probably like to continue to do that. NRC's at night.
You can
So
give up an NRC.
maybe,
I could take up NRC.
I can take it back too.
That's
I
a
had it
great
the first 2
committee.
years.
It's a great committee. I don't want to give it up because it's really
Yeah.
interesting.
I had it the first 2 years, so I just couldn't fit it in
Anyway, I'll
this year.
send that out
Okay.
and people can let me know essentially what you don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole, what you're dying to do, that kind of.
Although, I
Is
think
there
it was
ever-
you that wrote.
I'm wondering, I turn to Carmen as our institutional knowledge person here, being the longest on the board. Have we ever had two liaisons from the select board to a committee?
No, not that I'm aware of.
What you're thinking.
Well,
Tag
have-
teaming on the energy
Oh.
committee.
And I was gonna ask, have we ever had a tag team, i.e. not two at the same time, but two filling that one role?
So I'm not aware that we've ever done that, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't. I mean, it's a little bit administratively unwieldy because you might have a committee chair who wants to know who to call and they're, figure out which one of you to contact if there's two of you. But there's,
Well, again, the
it's
energy
doable.
committee is
Just
fairly
attend the meetings,
narrow, I mean, it's
that's
a
all.
very specific amount of time.
For this part of it.
Right,
and-
well,
Yeah, I
Yes,
think
potential to move.
I don't mind tag teaming, but I can tell you that if I'm Laurel or Hardy, whichever one you're not, I'll probably go to all of them,
Right.
well, okay, so that's,
just
To
because
be
I'd be
knowledgeable.
interested and want to make sure I understand what's going on, so.
Okay. That's a thought.
I will say, however, that the times when two committees have intersected, that have given an opportunity for two of us to get together and think about issues at the intersection of a couple of committees, it's very enlightening and interesting. So there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So we have our committee assignments, at least for the four new and a reappointment to the audit committee, which expires at 1 year, right? So this board has to make an appointment and by
By May,
May.
and
So
we're-
let's put
we
it on our
know
next
that-
agenda or,
Well, we got plenty of time, but I'd like to do it since I'm
Yeah.
suggesting I get appointed, that it happened before you leave as chair. You consider this a personal gift.
what kind of top is that? What number?
Is that
polystyrene? I
think.
It's
More
extruded
importantly,
polystyrene.
is it worth less than $50?
Is it full or is it empty?
I didn't think of that. I shouldn't have brought this, should I?
They have no choice.
There's
There are
a
very
number
few
that says
choices.
277, so.
There are very few choices for coffee lids, especially having learned today that the town's contractor for waste hauling cannot accept compostable lids and compostable materials.
any compostable materials.
It's picked out of the waste stream because, at the sorting facility because it doesn't meet, yeah, every place that you send your materials
Has a
to
different-
has a different
Different rule.
rule about what they can take and what they can't, and some require pre-sorting. And so
Okay.
compostable materials are not taken by our hauler, at least now, under contract.
Nor are things like milk cartons,
Neither are what?
milk cartons.
Someday, everything will come in a virtual container.
Right.
Get a cow.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is public comments. Is there anybody we haven't heard from that would like to come talk to us about anything? Justin? Terry? Tom? Anyone?
Tom, might be almost the end of your public comment time.
Committee liaison reports. It's been a while, unless they got discussed last week. I'd love to hear what's been happening if other people have been attending
Well,
meetings.
let me tell you about the Minuteman School Building
Yep.
Committee meeting. The Commissioner of Education has approved the new regional agreement. Those towns who have exited the district will be officially exited as of July 2017. They will continue to have a continuing capital obligation for the capital obligations that were incurred before their departure. Tomorrow, the Minuteman School Committee will be asked to vote the bonding issue. They will also be asked to vote to approve a district-wide vote on the bonding contingent on somebody voting no among the towns at town meeting. So that will be in place in the event that somebody votes no. And there's no date that will be specified until such time as they understand they need a date. But they're doing both those votes at the same time.
So there's a potential that we would have yet 2 more elections.
2 more votes.
Well, you know, if we
More elections, we have an election scheduled on April 12th.
right. Well, and if we got lucky, we could roll those together. I don't know
Well,
if
do
the
we have
time
the
would work.
ability to add items to the ballot?
Well, you'd need to know pretty far in advance, right? At
Right.
least when
Well,
do
I
the
think
ballots go to the printer?
Well, you need 35 days before an election to add something.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
we
we'll-
are not
But do we
there.
go to the printer before that?
No, not before that.
Okay.
I think they go to the printer 2 weeks
Well,
before.
We're under 30 days.
So we're
Yeah, so
less
we-
than a
we
month,
won't
so
know.
Can't make
we're-
that.
We won't know. So it's possible we could end up with another election. But, you know, the district has to pay for that election,
Still, it's a giant pain.
which, and the district is us, of course. but-
Dwindling support at the polls.
Exactly. Let's see, we had a lengthy conversation about how to do the presentations on the bonding issue at town meeting, and we had some discussion about financial projections on the impact of the capital debt on individual towns and individual taxpayers. There is some desire to have that presentation be as consistent as possible among towns, with the recognition that some towns care about different stuff and there will have to be some adjustments. And let's see, I also attended the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee meeting, and the legislation has been filed to transfer the Department of Corrections land to us for a parking lot for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And let's see. The Rail Trail Committee created, together with some individuals in town and the Historical Committee, some fantastic interpretive signs that talk about the history of things along the rail bed and the history of West Concord. And they're lovely. They're large. They have pictures. They have wonderful text, a lot of interesting historical facts. And those have been approved. And Concord will be, so far, the only spot along the trail that has done this, really. There's very little in the way of interpretive signage along the rest of the trail that explains what you're looking at and so forth. And there's some very interesting things. There were some great interpretive signs done for White Pond, but because the trail isn't going by White Pond yet, those were not approved. But they're just great. You know, they talk about how White Pond is a kettle pond and some diagrams and so forth. And I honestly think it would be great to get our hands on them and put them up anyway.
Sounds like also whoever was engaged in that might want to talk to the Estabrook Woods.
Oh, what an interesting idea. Yeah, yeah.
I think you also had provided, I kept a file. You had seen some interesting signs from another community for interpretive signage, and I kept those, thinking we should really go back to looking at those, and maybe we should do that in discussions with Estabrook Road, and Estabrook Woods rather, and the trails.
And let's see, the Agriculture Committee, as I mentioned, has been, they had a good discussion about neonic pesticides, and a really very full, good discussion. Manager from Farrell Farm came to explain their use, and Mark Hansen came, they had a good conversation back and forth. And they are planning Ag Day and the Ag Fair. They're also doing a Meet Your Farmer program at the Harvey Wheeler, which should be pretty fun. They're going to talk about some farming issues of various kinds, and then hang around to talk to people if they would like. They're also, I think, planning to have both the manager of Verrill Farm and the petitioner on the neonic article come and talk.
Okay.
And that's coming up. So.
That's coming up. And and then finally, they've invited Minuteman Voctech to participate in Ag Day. The horticultural program will participate, and also the culinary program may participate because they're thinking they might expand it a little bit. They're going to talk to the Board of Health about this. I don't know who the liaison is, but that's on their radar screen. About they're thinking about expanding to preparation of food and various other items with farm fresh ingredients. And the culinary program at Minuteman might be interested in that, as well as some of the area businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
I just have one item on public ceremonies. I know they were meeting this evening to finalize, or at least address one issue regarding one particular group applied to march in the parade, and they weren't sure or trying to determine if it was appropriate to have certain types of groups attend the parade. And we had town council. Thank you, Chris, for getting that info, and I think we found that, you know, if there are members who are Concordians for various groups, if they political or you know, some type of civic group, I think our experience in the past is we've been inclusive to have them join us. We have some criteria about how participation happens in the parade. Like, it's not like issuing leaflets or engaging the public directly. It's just being a group. So I haven't heard back yet what the committee vote was, but I think so far it was, all that information was well received. So.
Great. Anyone else?
I met Municipal Light Board. It was an interesting meeting. They discussed the articles, which I've already mentioned, and they heard from staff a sort of high-level outline of the strategic plan that the light plan is going to be moving ahead with. Very ambitious, very comprehensive, and so that's going to keep those guys out of trouble for a while. NRC meeting, I was not able to attend the meeting last time it met, but I would note that there's a public meeting coming up Wednesday, which is going to address the Moore Swamp issue.
Well, that one's a site view on, actually, Wednesday during the day is a site, they're
There's
gonna
a
do a
site view in the daytime at noon, and then the NRC regular meeting is at night, and Carmen and I will both be attending. Carmen is
From the CPW.
Public Works, yeah.
DPW, and as the liaison, and I suspect it's going to be a fairly good crowd show up for that.
Yeah, I neglected to mention that I attended the Public Works Committee meeting, and this was an issue that was touched upon there, and it has to do with the culverts around Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and some backup of, well, depending on how you look at it, you might consider it a backup of excess water in a flood storage plain, or you might consider it a suggestion to disturb a turtle habitat, depending on how you look at it. So the NRC and the Public Works Commission has for some time been trying to sort out how to compromise these issues in a way that works for everybody and also incidentally protects the town's infrastructure because there is a huge sewer main that goes right next to this impounded area with a lot of water heading for the wastewater treatment plant.
Right.
So if that were to go,
So it's
we'd
going
all
to be
be
an important
unhappy.
meeting
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Wednesday.
yep. This has been going on for a long time.
It has.
Anyone
Well, I had
else?
lots of, sorry.
I'm done.
Up to you.
Lots of meetings to report from. I was at the planning board a couple of times, and I think we've all gotten up to speed, but the public may not. One of the highlights of the planning board meetings was the review and final decision of the Kearsarge solar permits at W.R. Grace. We had a fairly, a good turnout from folks who live on North Hayes, or North Branch Road and Hayes. And the permit, a contingent permit was issued. And then town staff has been working with Kearsarge to meet the contingencies that were issued. I don't know that we've heard anything further.
No, still waiting to hear.
Okay, so the alacrity of the permit was in part to support the need to get into the SREC 2 final process, and I'm certainly hoping that we will benefit from that.
And I will note that our legislative representatives, our legislators, both Senator Barrett and Representative Atkins, have agreed to, they'll be writing in support of our inclusion in SREC 2. We're very grateful to them for that.
And other planning board discussions really were about preparing for town meeting and the discussion of the FAR proposal, the floor area ratio. And I think that it's been interestingly changed from previous incantations, and I think there's been a lot of acknowledgement of both what I think there was a intern that worked on this, and the article that's being presented reflects all of that input. In the Historic Districts Committee, it was, we can go through the homes that came before it, but they're pretty, it's always interesting. In fact, I think you were vacationing, so I may have to share it with you.
Even better.
Speaking of Justin King, a member of the Historic Districts Commission. Then also to do with the planning board, it was very interesting. They instituted the first, I believe, ever West Concord Advisory Committee, which is a subcommittee of the planning board. They had the West Concord Advisory Committee attend the planning board meeting this past week and then report. And one thing I want to make sure we put on the calendars for town is that, and per the earlier comment about the grand communication process of West Concord Advisory Committee, they have their open house scheduled for, I believe it is April 28th. And the subject's going to be arts in West Concord as part of their application to become a cultural district.
Oh, yeah.
And they're looking for a band. So anybody that has a band that wants to play for the West Concord Advisory Committee's annual open house, I'm looking at our resident
Yeah, cool.
musician.
Muse.
Exactly.
Do you know Group Muse?
Yeah.
They are performing artists from Boston looking at a number of different artists.
we go.
Looking for venues, so Group Muse,
Group News, Muse.
GROUPMUSE. They're like Berkeley students
Oh,
of many
Great.
different variety.
fabulous, fabulous. And then the other meeting that I attended was the Board of Assessors this morning, which was very interesting. There were a number of abatement requests that had to do with some of the issues that we've seen in town. So one abatement request that was discussed was at a property at the corner of the of the high school access road as a result of some of the impacts or anticipated impacts of a much more regularly used field. And but the lights from that, and there was an interesting acknowledgement that they thought there'd be a noise bylaw and a lighting bylaw that the town should protect them from, and then there was an acknowledgement that that's actually district land, and so it's less clear that they had, so that was one discussion, and the other one was for a house near, that abuts White's Pond. And there was part of their request was based on the blue-green algae blooms in the pond, and a sense that their value had changed. I don't know that is true. I'm certainly hoping that our algae bloom was a one and done, and we don't see it again. But I also am very proud of what the White Pond Advisory Committee suggested, what the town's followed up on in terms of the process with White Pond, having moved here from another town with a lake that I was on the lake committee of. You know, it's hard to fix pond issues or lake issues, and you know, we're doing our best. So those were some highlights.
But on the subject of a bylaw, I think if we had a noise bylaw or a light bylaw, I think the district would have to comply with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Oh, it was not my conversation to be in the middle of.
Yep.
Thank you.
Understood.
Miscellaneous correspondence. One of the things that I think we heard from Carmen some time ago, and I think it's a very good suggestion, is that we had a number of green cards for committees that we couldn't use all of the volunteers, and that it's probably worthwhile writing a thoughtful response to those who were not selected to participate on a committee. So I'd like to acknowledge that, and I'd be happy to write those letters, at least draft them, and if I can figure out all the people who were not selected for some of the committees that we were looking for membership.
Well, I would move to authorize the chair to write and send such letters.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. On the subject of really miscellaneous correspondence, we've received a number of lovely cards and things from our sister city of Nanai. And we don't do anything like that as a board. Do you do anything like that as a town manager? And we certainly have a lot of wonderful things to put on postcards around here, and it seems to me that it would be lovely to make a practice of sending the annual card to the townhouse in
Great idea.
in Nanai Town and to the mayor and so forth. And Ruth is looking at me because she knows that it's going to end up being her job. So, but it's a good idea, isn't it, Ruth?
We'll volunteer Trish to help you out with that.
Well, we also have another contingent of students leaving.
Yeah.
Yeah, going very soon.
I should have
Very soon.
mentioned that on your behalf, I greeted the group of students visiting from Japan
Oh,
at the high school last week.
Last week.
It was
Oh,
great.
Thursday.
Didn't know they were here last week.
I got an
It was a
email
surprise.
sort of the
what do you mean
night before.
surprise?
And anyway, so I went, and it was lovely because there were, you guys won't recall, but I had the occasion to give a small lecture while you guys
Oh,
were
right,
at the
at the university.
Sapporo Brewery.
It was an educational tour.
Educational tour of the brewery. And the
And I have
professor,
photos of the beer mustaches to prove it.
and the professor whose class I was, and 3 of the students were part of the school.
Fabulous.
So that was very nice.
Oh,
So,
that's great.
but it was a big group, and they seemed happy, and
Yeah.
so
Isn't that
I should have
great?
mentioned that.
Great.
So it was good to see them.
Okay, so good idea. Add that to our list as part of our correspondence, at least an annual card. And volunteer from the Public Celebrations Committee in making the cards for us.
Sure.
All right, and next item is committee nominations. We have quite a few this evening.
No, just one.
No, there are more. You can start with that one if you'd like.
Pull up your list.
Yep,
for me.
right there. The only one is I'm not sure about that last.
I'm not gonna make that.
So you want to start with the ones that you have, or how do you, where do we?
I nominate Erin Logan of 18 Nathan Pratt Drive to the Public Ceremonies Committee to expire May 31st, 2021.
Do I have a second? Oh, no seconds needed on nominations.
And I would like to nominate Dan Gainsborough of 899 Lowell Road, Elise Woodward of Garfield Road, John Dalton of Indian Pipe Lane, Pam Hill of Whittemore Street, and Brian Folds of Riverdale Road to be members of the Energy Futures Task Force.
There's that one. Great. Are there other nominations? Where are we with public, the long-range plan? Is that
I
what
was
this
wondering
list is?
about
I'm not sure what this list is. This was
Is a
attached
long-range
to,
plan.
these are all the long-range plan?
Yes, this is the long-range
So
plan.
we're still, some of those missing slots are committees that need to give us somebody. And at this point, we have more at-large volunteers than we
Yep.
need, and perhaps we might suggest some of those individuals to the committees as their nominee.
Agreed.
Right.
All right, so we have a little bit of work to do on the
Right.
long-range plan. And I added one name that was not on this list, which was Elise Woodward.
She's
Oh,
on
maybe I
the-
missed it.
She's on the
I added
long-range
that.
plan.
Have you added it? I don't
Oh,
see her
okay, so
elsewhere.
maybe, no, maybe it was, maybe I didn't
So-
add it there, maybe I added it to the other, that's fine.
How
That's
do we
good.
wrestle this to the ground?
I think we need to talk with, CHC needs a rep, Rec needs a rep. And I think this needs a little analysis. How about our new liaison? Look at this list, look at it against the charge, see if we can, where we're missing people and figure out where we have holes to
But we
fill.
definitely have more
People than we need.
at-large
Yep.
volunteers than we need, and some of those people would be
Maybe on other-
perfectly appropriate to
appropriate for-
be,
With some of those.
A representative
Yeah.
of one of these others, yeah.
because of their backgrounds, to
This,
represent those
this does
committees.
remind me, though, it came up at the planning board meeting. There was some confusion as to whether or not we'd gone down to one from the planning board versus two.
So I think we ask Marcia, the charge
calls for
says
one.
one.
One, exactly, because right now
Marcia
we
had
have.
proposed two, or at least we had heard that there were two planning board members who wanted to participate. One, I think Marcia should recommend who she would like to have on this committee.
Okay, I'll follow up with Marcia.
Okay. So you'll take that one on, you think? Okay, perfect, thank you.
And I don't know if it's on here, but I think given the election of Bob Grom to the school committee, we had talked before we made the nomination that if he was elected, then he would not be a member of the Public-Private Partnership Committee.
Unless he ends up being the school
think
committee's
that may-
nominee.
Right, which
Yeah.
is what,
But I haven't heard back from Wally, I think, on
Not me.
what they're planning to do on that, so
do you want me to try reaching out to him?
I'll reach out
Okay.
to Wally to
But
see.
in any case, we need one more nominee there, right?
Well, even if he is the
Right.
school rep, then we still
Still
need
need a name.
another nominee, so we should look and see if we had any.
There were other names,
folks.
There were some other
'Cause I
names.
think
Yeah.
there was somebody that because that was what
Yeah, I
led
think
to
there
the
was-
notion of sending out thank yous
Yeah.
to folks.
So let's take a look at the public-private partnership group. By the way, this is very helpful to see all of the green cards in these spreadsheets. It's very nice to
Yeah.
see this, thank you. It's very helpful.
You have a more robust spreadsheet than I do.
No, it's the same one. Well, she's added people
that's-
to it.
Oh,
Okay,
I just added a few for the meeting.
So you ready for?
I am
committee
ready for
appointment?
committee appointments.
I move to appoint Phil Gibson of 32 Highland Street and Peter Maher of Westford to the Public-Private Partnership Study Committee for terms to expire May 31st, 2017.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
move to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?